Sign here, Alina. Richard Hale pushed the clipboard toward me, while rain slid off the edge of my black umbrella and splashed onto Martin's garage floor. I stared at the blank signature line. The real estate agent shifted behind him, uncomfortable. Mrs. Morris, we can reschedule if... No, Richard cut in. She's had 3 months. This place is nothing but old junk and she knows it. My hand tightened around the rusted key until the teeth pressed into my palm. That garage belonged to my husband, I said. Richard gave a small laugh, the kind meant for everyone but me. Martin never trusted you with practical matters, Alina. Let's not pretend grief suddenly made you a businesswoman. The agent looked down. That was the first moment something inside me moved instead of breaking. Because Martin had kept this garage locked for 27 years. Because every time I asked what was inside, he'd kissed my forehead and said, "Don't go in there, Alina. Not ever." And because after he died suddenly, Richard became the only person holding the papers, the answers, and the authority to tell me what my own life was worth. Richard tapped the clipboard again. Sell it unopened. That's what Martin would have wanted. But when I looked at the buyer's name, there wasn't one. Just a small property company I'd never heard of. Who is buying it? I asked. Richard's jaw tightened. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. What matters is the unpaid tax notice on your kitchen table. What matters is storage fees, legal fees, and the fact that you don't have Martin's income anymore. The rain came harder. The old garage door rattled in the wind. Then Mrs. Bell, our neighbor across the street, called from her porch. Alina, did Martin's brother tell you about the men who came here the night after the funeral? Richard spun around. Go inside, Helen, you're confused. But Mrs. Bell didn't move. 2 men, she said, loading crates into his van. The clipboard slipped slightly in Richard's hand. I looked at him. What crates? There were no crates. His answer came too fast. For 3 months, I had let Richard speak for Martin. I had let him tell the family I was too fragile, too emotional, too confused to handle estate decisions. I had let him stand between me and the one locked door my husband had forbidden me to open. Not anymore. I walked past Richard. Alina, he warned. I put the key in the lock. Alina, don't. The lock turned with a deep metallic snap. I pushed the garage door open, and the smell of dust, oil, and old wood rolled out into the rain. At first, all I saw were tarps hanging from the rafters and long shapes covered beneath gray sheets. Then my eyes landed on the workbench. A layer of dust covered almost everything. Almost. In the center of the bench was a clean rectangular mark, as if something had just been moved. And beside it, pressed clearly into the dust, were fresh fingerprints. Martin had been dead for 3 months. So who had been inside his forbidden garage? I stepped into the garage, and Richard stayed behind me at the threshold, like the doorway itself had become a line he didn't want me crossing. 5 minutes, he said, then you sign. I didn't answer. The garage wasn't cluttered. That was the first lie I could see with my own eyes. Every shelf had white labels in Martin's handwriting. Engine oil, tax records, body panels, private. The tools weren't scattered. They hung in perfect rows. Even the tarps over the large shapes on the floor had been clipped down neatly, like Martin had expected someone to inspect them one day. This isn't junk, I said. Richard stepped inside. You don't know what you're looking at. Near the workbench, I saw an old photograph tucked beneath a magnet. Martin and Richard stood shoulder to shoulder in front of this same garage, both much younger, both smiling. But Richard's face had been scratched out with black pen. My stomach tightened. What happened between you two? I asked. Richard's eyes flicked to the photo. Brothers argue. Then I saw it. A cream envelope taped beneath the edge of the workbench. My name was written across the front. Alina. I reached for it, but Richard moved faster. He snatched it from my hand. That's business material, he said. It has my name on it. It's not part of the estate. I held out my hand. Give it back. His voice dropped. Martin kept things from you for a reason. Maybe he didn't want you knowing what kind of man he really was. The words hit exactly where he meant them to. For 1 second, I saw every locked evening, every late night, every time Martin had said, "Trust me," while keeping this door closed. Then my eyes caught a cabinet in the corner. Unlike the others, its lock was bright and new. I moved toward the bolt cutters hanging on the wall. Richard grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to remind me he thought he could stop me. I pulled free. This garage is on my property now. For the first time, Richard looked less angry than afraid. You have no idea what Martin did in here. I took the envelope from his loosened hand, slid it open with a utility knife, and pulled out a single receipt. Storage transfer. Dated 2 days after Martin's funeral. Before I could read the address, Richard lunged forward, ripped it from my fingers, and tore it in half. By Sunday afternoon, Richard had turned Martin's memorial luncheon into a courtroom without a judge. People stood around my dining room with paper plates and lowered voices, while Richard held court beside the framed photo of my husband. "Alina is grieving," he announced, loud enough for every cousin, neighbor, and friend to hear. "Yesterday she broke into Martin's garage and started chasing imaginary documents." I walked in carrying the torn receipt taped across the middle. The room went quiet. "I didn't break into anything," I said. "The garage is on my property, and this isn't imaginary." Richard's smile stayed fixed. "You're embarrassing yourself." I held up the receipt. "Then explain why property was transferred out of Martin's garage 2 days after his funeral, before probate cleared, before I signed anything." A few people looked at Richard. He chuckled too sharply. "Spare parts. Martin stored things for friends." From the back of the room, Mrs. Bell said, "Then why were 2 men loading wooden crates into your van at midnight?" Richard's face hardened. "Helen, this is a family matter." "It became my matter when you called me confused," she said. The real estate agent, Mr. Lawson, stood near the doorway, pale and silent. I turned to him. "The buyer for the garage, who is it?" Richard stepped forward. "Don't answer that." Mr. Lawson swallowed. "The offer came through Ashford Property Holdings." I pulled the draft sale packet from my purse and opened it to the mailing address. "That address is Richard's office." Whispers spread through the room. Richard's voice sharpened. "Martin left written instructions. The garage contents belong to my business." He unfolded a letter and held it up like a weapon. "Signed by him." I looked at the signature, then at the man who had tried to make me sell my husband's locked garage without opening the door. "You were buying it from me through your own company," I said. Richard leaned close, his smile gone. "Open that cabinet, Alina," he whispered, "and you'll wish you sold it blind." Before sunrise on Monday, I returned to the garage with 3 people Richard hadn't expected me to find. A locksmith, my niece Mara, and a probate attorney named Claire Benson, who stood in the driveway with a leather folder under one arm. "He filed an emergency petition this morning," Claire told me. "He's claiming you're damaging estate property and mentally unfit to manage it." Mara looked at me. "That's why we open it now." The locksmith knelt in front of the newer cabinet. The bright lock clicked after less than a minute. Inside, there were no love letters. No photographs of another woman. No secret life I had been afraid to find. There were rows of labeled binders, flash drives in plastic sleeves, insurance appraisals, and photographs of old cars stripped down to metal, then rebuilt piece by piece. Claire pulled one appraisal free and stared at the number. "Alina," she said carefully, "this isn't garage junk. These vehicles may be worth more than the house." Mara lifted the edge of the nearest tarp. Underneath was a restored black convertible, polished so clean it reflected the rafters above it. My knees nearly gave out against the workbench. Martin's labels matched nights he had told me he was working late, the scratched photograph, the torn storage receipt, Richard's hidden buyer. None of it pointed to an affair. It pointed to a fight over money. Then I saw a small metal case on the bottom shelf. My initials were written on masking tape. EM. Inside was a digital recorder and a folded note in Martin's handwriting. Play this with a lawyer present. Claire looked toward the open garage door. We need to stop the sale and inventory everything before Richard claims anything disappeared. Too late. Richard's car screeched into the driveway behind a deputy's cruiser. He stepped out holding court papers. "She's stealing estate assets," he shouted. "I want those keys." Neighbors began gathering at the edge of the lawn. The deputy raised his hand. "Everyone stay calm." Richard pointed at me. "Hand them over." I gripped the keys, shaking, and looked at Claire. She said, "The order is temporary. Evidence can challenge it." Mara plugged the recorder into a small speaker. Static cracked through the garage. Then Martin's voice filled the room, weak but clear. "If Alina is hearing this, then Richard has already." Richard slammed his hand against the breaker panel. The lights died. The darkness lasted only a second before Mara's laptop screen lit her face blue. Richard froze beside the breaker panel. Mara looked at him and said, "Too late. I copied the file before I pressed play." Claire stepped between Richard and the workbench. "No one touches anything else. Deputy, everyone here is now a witness." The deputy's hand moved to his belt. "Mr. Hale, step away from the panel." Richard didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he backed into the center of the garage, where the uncovered convertible gleamed under the gray morning light. Mara clicked the file again. Martin's voice returned, thin and tired. "If Alina is hearing this, then Richard has already tried to take the garage." No one spoke. Martin continued. "Alina, I'm sorry. I told you never to come in here because I was ashamed of what my brother had done, and more ashamed that I let him corner me." I sat down on the edge of the workbench before my legs could fail. The recording explained everything. Years earlier, Martin and Richard had run a restoration business together. Richard had drained accounts, forged invoices, and used company money to cover his personal debts. When Martin found out, Richard threatened to twist old business liabilities against him, bury him in lawsuits, and make sure I lost the house if Martin exposed him too soon. So Martin had started rebuilding value inside the garage. The cars under the tarps were Richard's. They were restored piece by piece with documented money, appraised, insured, and prepared to be transferred into my name. The binders proved where funds had gone. The flash drives held copies of invoices. The storage receipt matched crates Richard had removed after the funeral. The shell company in the sale papers was named directly in Martin's recording. Then Martin said the sentence that broke the silence. "Alina, I should have trusted you sooner." I covered my mouth with one hand, not because I wanted to hide my tears, but because for 3 months I had wondered whether my husband's locked door meant betrayal. Now his voice was telling me the betrayal had been standing beside me with a clipboard. Richard turned toward the door. Mrs. Bell stepped into his path, leaving already. The deputy said, "Mr. Hale, stay where you are." Claire collected the binders, the recorder, the forged letter, and the sale packet. Within days, Richard was removed as executor. The court froze his claim against the estate. The sale of the garage collapsed. The storage unit from the torn receipt was opened, and the wooden crates Mrs. Bell had seen were recovered before Richard's men could move them again. The forged letter didn't survive comparison with Martin's real signature. Neither did Richard's reputation. Relatives who had whispered that I was unstable stopped calling. At the next family gathering, Richard's chair sat empty, and when his name came up, no one defended him. The fraud investigation took his business license first, then his office, then the polished confidence he had used to make me feel small. As for the garage, I didn't sell it blind. The cars were inventoried, appraised, and sold properly, except for one. A restored black convertible with a paper tag taped beneath the steering wheel. For E. Months later, I opened the garage doors myself on a bright morning. The shelves were clean. The legal boxes were sealed. Martin's old warning sign was gone. In its place, I hung a small brass plate. No locked doors between people who deserve the truth. And from that day on, I sold nothing blind again, and Richard never held a key to my life.